And welcome back. Welcome to the second segment. We have with us Jackie Castillo, who is representing the Institute of Creative Arts. She's the Industry Development Officer. Morning, Jackie. We also have with us the Belize Film Commissioner, no other than Nigel Miguel. And we have with us Chris Pack, who is the executive producer and is representing the media productions of, I think that is Jam Casting and Productions. I got that right?
Two Jamcasts.
Two Jamcasts. Welcome, guys.
Great to be here. Good morning.
Good morning.
Let's treat our guests first because I'll just do that. Chris, Belizeans may know of some of your productions, but they don't know necessarily your affiliation with it. So let's talk a little bit about your company, what you do, and what are some of the shows that you've worked on.
Right now, Two Jam Casting Productions has a show called Cigars and Stars that we've produced this year, and we're currently in negotiations for finalizing distribution. But prior to that, I've produced 4 seasons of Island Hunters for HGTV, and we shot in Belize 7 times. And I've been working closely with Nigel and the Film Commission to work on education and training and the development of the entertainment industry in Belize, not just for Belize, but also Belize as a leader in the region and the world.
Now, why an interest in Belize? Because very often, Belize is perhaps, and I know this is a part of the challenge that Nigel has, to get especially Americans to come down and see the potential in Belize. Why Belize for you?
I think it's really started with the relationships and seeing that there's an openness and hospitality, not just for the warmth of the people, but the beauty and the diversity of Belize. Because there's so much in Belize, not just, because people typically think about the beautiful islands, but there's beauty all over Belize with diverse locations. You have the Mennonite regions in the north, which remind me of the Midwest and Amish farming country. There's other regions that I've toured that remind me of Shenandoah Valley in Virginia. So when you think about the diversity of locations, there's a lot to offer in the culture, the language, the people, the places. In San Ignacio, you have the diversity of and the richness of Spanish culture and influence with architecture and things such as that. So there's so much that offers to Hollywood and locations to explore because you want to be able to, if you have incentives which could bring people in, you also think about, from a Hollywood perspective, if I could produce something here, can I do a lot of it here, And that's something that's beautiful and that I've seen as a tremendous value and appeal to Hollywood. And introducing other people. And not even just in terms of places, one of the things that we're looking at is that there's a tremendous skill and workforce in Belize. For one of the reasons that I'm here, as well as I'm introducing some colleagues from some major studios who are specialists in post-production and animation. So as part of the film festival, we'll have a workshop, symposium on animation and post-production. He's a special effects and animation post-production executive. And so we're going to be looking to connect with companies who specialize in post-production, special effects, graphics, animation, because we might be able to determine that there's companies that already, with their skill sets that they have, we can actually bring real-world projects to. Because Nigel and I, as we work together and talk, we want to bring real projects to real people in Belize.
Let me just ask you, because you said something just now that really triggered something in my mind's eye. And it has to do with the idea that very often people look at Belize as a beautiful backdrop, but you're not necessarily a part of the story. You're just background. Now you're talking about the diversity of Belizeans in general, especially culturally.
Right.
So how do your productions or your vision in terms of the productions that you are interested in Belize will highlight that aspect of it as opposed to just the beautiful background?
So before entering the entertainment industry, my background is as an ethnomusicologist. So I love people and culture. And I think one of the other reasons I'm here, I'm going to be helping with Final Draft, which is the world's premier screenwriting software, and some other industry screenwriting workshop that's focusing on how Belizean stories and other stories for people that are coming to the festival from their cultural richness and heritage, those stories can come to life. So we don't need to, as we often talk about in Hollywood, to whitewash.
Well, one of the things,
Yeah,
one
yeah.
of the things that's important and why the relationship with Chris has flourished how it has is that he sees our vision. Out of the commission and over at Niche, we want to be able to tell Belize-centric stories to the world. They're established here, but we're not just making them for Belizeans, we're making it for the world, because what we have and what makes us unique are the stories that we tell, that we have. The important thing is now that we have the capabilities of telling them to a global market on that global standard. So you'll see a lot of what you would consider local productions going on in the future, but it's not just for consumption here, it's consumption for the world. Once we establish that, then people will start to look inward to Belize for other things, because the hardest thing is for you to be able to control the narrative of your story from a relatively small place. But it's also the most important thing that we do. We need to tell our stories to the world. Forget about any other thing that's going on. We need to tell our stories to the world. And once we do that and establish that playing field, then the world will look inside to us differently, or come to us for the expertise on not just Belizean stuff, but just production.
Nigel, as film commissioner, one of the things, and I guess perhaps your biggest challenge, is to create a Belizean brand, but not let it mean inferior. And I think the marriage here could perhaps bring value to the Belizean story. But how do you encourage Belizeans to tell their stories, especially when what you see on television may not reflect anything, but people think that's what I have to aspire to? If I'm doing a video, you'll still see all the fancy cars, the women, the mansions, everything, even though that's not the reality here. But people think that's what others want to see.
Well, that's fine. That just can't be the only thing that's out there from Belize. So you can have the fancy cars, the women, because that's all perception and dream. But there are real stories that are, organic to Belize, that are beautiful stories that need to be told. And those are what we want to get out. And then, like you said, the level. You start walking, then you jog, and then you run. So every level of production, you can appreciate where you are, but that's not where you want to stay. And for us maybe to get from point A to, say, point C, we need to be pulled and pushed. So the pulling comes along with the outside influences, but the pushing comes from the organizations like the Film Commission, like Niche, that we push our young people or our local talent to go out there. You need this. Now, with our guidance and our support, of course, but the relationships, like a person like Chris, and there are some other people that are coming in, they get it, and they might have the expertise and the willingness to share. So we have to sort of bridge that gap to make our talent, our workforce. Anybody that's serious about being in this industry, because right now, the thing is that if you're in this industry, you have another job to supplement your income. We need to establish this industry to the point where if I say, you know what, I'm a director, or I'm a producer, or I'm an actor, that's all I do. And we're not that far from doing it, but there are some key strokes that need to be done to get us to that point. And it's up to us, government, just people in those positions to sort of help, to uplift. Because the biggest export that we have, I know people say it's tourism and all that. No, it's the experience of when people come here. But if we can ship that experience out, we will touch so many more people than actually have them to come to Belize to actually see the Belizean experience. Because it's a beautiful thing. And, when you talk about putting positive spin or positive light on situations that actually happen in this country, that's the easiest way, man, because you hit that button, 1 million people can see it. Just like if you hit that button and it's negative, millions of people can see it.
we're having this conversation in the context of managing copyright in audiovisual production. And when I was preparing to come on this morning, I had to chuckle a little because Belize is probably the only country in the world that you cannot go into a store and purchase an original movie in any store in Belize. There seems to be a lack of respect in terms of other people's work. And I understand the economic, and this is a cultural thing. It's not something that I'm pointing fingers at because 4 fingers come back at me. But we seem to have a lack of respect for other people's work. How does that affect the development of the local industry? No, I'm not talking about when we get to the place when producing movies, because then directly people who are directors and actors will see, no man, you're taking my money. But how do we start that culture now?
Well, it's one of the reasons why we want to have the conversation. Tomorrow, the idea of the workshop is not necessarily for us to discuss enforcement. It's kind of for us to start a conversation because there are several players in the game. You have the talent, you have the media, you have the broadcasters, you have the production houses, you have the artists or the director and the producers that are sitting at home coming up with these stories and these ideas to tell. And it's across the board in Belize, whether it's film, music, visual arts. Within the creative industries, we have an issue of respecting others' work. But I believe that before we get into enforcement, we can educate, really. That's what education is. We start the conversation, we build awareness. I mean, you wouldn't want me to just say that I will take your work, and go and market it. Chris and I were speaking earlier about the car on the parking lot. I can't just take your car and drive off the parking lot with it, can I? I cannot.
You can't, we go to jail.
Well, right. You will go. It's the same kind of idea. I was explaining to Chris that I've created jingles before, and I get a one-time payment for it, and then I hear it in perpetuity. How do we make sure that the talent are compensated for the use of their work?
Get better lawyers.
Well, we can litigate, but I am a firm believer of educate before we litigate, because litigation is expensive. So tomorrow what we kind of want to do is we want to look at what exists. We have Ola from Belize to come and speak to us about what the laws, what's the bottom line. This is what exists in Belize. This is what the law says. And then we will discuss more or less, how can we work with this? What does this mean for film industry in Belize? What does this mean? We're going to touch a little bit on music because, well, all of them, film encompasses a lot. Soundtracks especially. Several things, talent, actors, models, photography. All of those things play an important role when you're deciding if you want to work in the audiovisual industry. We spoke about animation, So all of this are coming at us. And like what Nigel says, we have to push it out. Once it gets out there on a global scene, we will meet standards and we will need to hold those standards. But in Belize, those standards exist, but they're not necessarily enforced.
So my question, my question is, the conversation is necessary.
Yes.
I fully endorse that. What legal framework exists so that people know that it's not just a conversation, it's not just going to be a workshop, and then we all talk about it and it becomes a talk shop, and then nothing happens as a result. So how do we stitch all the pieces together to eventually create the business that will make it sustainable?
Well, we do have a copyright law. We signed on to the Berne Convention. That is something that exists in Belize. Recently, I believe Belize has been able to table a paper to cabinet regarding both online data, anything that has to do with on the internet. We're looking at something like that because that was what was holding us back. We had a copyright law, but it was only mainly prints, excuse me, music, anything that you create, you own. However, I know Ola has been able to table a paper to look at our copyright law to include where we are now, which is technology. And a lot of media houses are facing a challenge where certain things you can't play on Facebook because then you're flagged. Even on Instagram, you're flagged because we're now in a technological age. So what we're starting to do, what Nich and Belipo, as well as the Ministry of I think it's Finance, we've been looking at how we can discuss the law and address the changes that are happening now. And I know that the paper is on the table for cabinet. I don't know where we are with it, but we're looking at these things and we're trying to establish that regulatory framework so that we can get to that stage. So it's not just a law on paper, it's a law that will be representative of where we are today.
I would also say one thing, sorry, but we have to be able to determine as talent, and I will speak from being in front of the camera. In the case of like in the U.S., we have unions, SAG, AFTRA, all these different type of unions for talent on camera. And within that, they have their bylaws and they're strict and you follow them. Now, I'm not saying in Belize we need to have unions for our actors, but we need to have some type of regulation or laws for fair practices. I, as a producer, should come to you, and if I want to use your talent, your expertise on camera, and work out a fair deal. Now, you shouldn't gouge me, and I shouldn't take advantage of you, but I think that in the case of when you're saying with your jingles, there should be a time frame on it.
Right.
You don't really need a law to determine that, but two people doing business together, should have that agreement. Part of the problem is we as talent in this country don't know what true value we have. Because like I said, we're trying to survive. So if you come to me and say, hey, look, I'm gonna give you $500 for this song, and you're like, wow.
Sign me up.
Yeah, I'm gonna do that. But like you said, if 10 years from now, you still hear that song playing, basically he gave you $50 for that song per year for 10 years, 500. You do the math. That's not fair. That's such a one-sided deal. Those type of things need to be put in place. And like I said, that doesn't need to be a law. That's just business 101. Yeah. Now, I might not know business and you're a business person, so yeah, you take advantage, but those little things can happen very easily.
I have a friend who is one of the best in Belize over at Youngstar Entertainment, Tariq Young. And I get to see the inside of what he does. He has experience outside of Belize at Hollywood.
Represents us very well.
Yes, very passionate, very focused.
Did my video.
Yes, yes, and you know his talent. But there are two different aspects that I recognize. There is the importation of persons who come in and set up and just use Belize to make a production, whether or not it's local content for shows or just for scene placement in Belize. But then there's the local industry of people locally who, I forget a couple of the guys' names, who actually produce movies here on their own budgets. But we don't understand how far copyright goes to production. The very program that used to edit, you'd be very surprised that a lot of the local people don't have the proper license to use it. We're using a bootleg version. Yeah. How do we manage where we are as an industry in terms of copyright to be able to perform in an industry where to pay for a program that costs you thousands of dollars or hundreds of dollars, we're getting the patch version and putting it together.
Well,
but still being able to produce quality stuff for the international.
Part of the relationship that we have with Chris, and he's been a godsend, honestly, from him coming here, his company coming here to shoot, to him actually partnering with us. He's introduced a lot of those same softwares. He's actually given 2 different sets of scholarships to Belizeans to be able to have those same particular softwares that you're talking about so that they can operate with a real copy, international standards. Final Draft is one of them, let's just say, as an example. over the past 2 years, he's given out 10 scholarships to have final draft for Belizeans to use, Belizean writers. What that does for us, right now, if you have a script and say I want to give it to a international producer or whatever outside of the country, you know it has to be formatted a certain way for them to be able to receive it. That example that you gave, not being able to have the proper software to be able just to hit that button and the producer can get it, is a huge asset for us now to be able to do it, but it was a deterrence back then. I would actually give somebody a script and they'd say, okay, I'm interested in it. But when it gets received to them, the way it's formatted, it makes us look like clowns. It's not formatted right into that system. And for them to receive it, nobody wants to do anything out of the extra. They want it just to be seamless, that they get it, because they're already in their mind doing you a favor. They're going to put money to your project. So they should be able to receive it simple. That's the biggest thing. Then there's some other softwares attached to Final Draft that now Belizean artists or writers, let's just say, will be able to use so that that transition is seamless, man. That's such a huge thing for us because it puts our writers on the same level. Forget what the content is, but just the process of receiving the content on the same level with everyone else around the world. And even though people are coming outside of the country to do things, they want it to be just like they're at home. And the easier that we can make that process happen, the better it is for us.
Yeah, and it's one of the reasons why, even though we're having this workshop tomorrow, there are several other industry development workshops, we want to call it, because one of the workshops that we've been wanting to have for a very long time is training persons in Belize for productions. Because a lot of the times, and Chris can speak about this, you come into Belize and you're looking for people who are able to do certain skills on a production set. And we that are here might think that, oh, well, we've done several movies, so we know what a gopher is. We know what we're doing. And when an international production house requests something, that's when we realize how much we are not equipped to handle. So one of the things that we want to do is have a series of workshops where we just train people. Build those capacities and the talents of those that are able to work on a production. I'm sure it's going to happen soon, but
I think it's a 2019. We're in initial talks about 2019 with looking at very tangible workshops and skill development to build the workforce in different angles that are really a 360 look at the entertainment industry and building upon the strengths and the skills and the talent that Belizeans already have. So, and I think that's the important thing, is that Belizeans have stories to tell. Yeah. They already have skills. They already have the talent. And so from an international perspective, there's a tremendous resource, and not just a backdrop. And a couple of, my involvement with other, like as a member of the Television Academy, and I'm also the co-chair of employment for the Producers Guild of America on the West Coast. I have a lot of conversations with my peers about international production, and one of the conversations initially always goes to is the workforce at the level so that we can hit the ground running. Yeah. And that's the goal, is to be able to get...
That will happen.
Yeah,
guaranteed.
And there's...
We will build the workforce here.
And that's why we shot 7 times for Island Hunters here, because we have great fixers and team members and folks that we can work with. If we had a bad experience the first time, we wouldn't come back another 6.
Right.
Let me ask something from a different perspective, because I think you're talking about vocabulary building, so to speak. When you say a gopher, that there's an international language that says this is what you're capable of. In Belize, the challenge is, if I do sound or audio, since we're doing that, sound, what does it actually mean? Even to break down when you're talking about audiovisual productions, what does that really mean? Because in the age of social media, everybody's a model, everybody's a photographer, everybody's so many other things. but what should it mean when you're talking about a professional level in terms of building that vocabulary?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the things that Nigel and I have been working on as well with the Film Academy, partnering with Film Skills, which is the world's largest online film academy. It's in 80 schools around the world. So we're working to build an academy so Belizeans can understand on all aspects of the industry. And once some other things come aligned with funding, we can actually launch that, but it's ready to go. And that's where when we think about learning, it's sometimes putting names and titles to the skills you already have. And also realizing, even on a personal level, half the time the battle is with ourselves, realizing that our stories are actually worth something. And I think what Nigel and I are really trying to do is saying to Belizeans that their stories already have worth. Mm-hmm. They are worth something, and they need to be told. Now, when you get into the business of storytelling, you determine how and where those stories can be told, because you sometimes prioritize them based upon what types of projects you're looking to develop. And there's a whole lot of work that goes into developing those stories. So when you get into, and this is something I was wanting to touch on as it relates to copyright law. I was at a meeting at Netflix last week, and I've been doing a lot of conversations and going to different events. I was at Netflix twice last week. One of the key things, and this is coming from one of the divisions of Netflix, I was at the TV Academy for a meeting as well. They are global. 300 to 400 million subscribers globally. 100 million people watch documentaries on average. But when I was sitting just outside the office of Netflix, it was so beautiful to me. I watched people from all around the world leaving. I heard Portuguese, Spanish, I heard Chinese, I heard German, I heard all sorts of languages. And Netflix walks the talk in terms of diversity. They are building offices all around the world because they believe in the power of the story and not some Hollywood traditional story that, and I'm a white guy, right, that is really like whitewashed. They want to empower the stories, and a lot of these other streaming services, Hulu, Amazon, Prime, etc. And the power of these streaming services is that they are wanting to empower stories around the world. And so the opportunity for Belize to become a global player in this space is to also think the value and the worth. If you go to buy a house, you start to do the paperwork. I'm going to buy this house, and then you try to get the title. But then are there the mineral rights and other rights that could be tied to that? Maybe maybe there's an aquifer underneath, the water right, all those things. So when you think about creativity, it's like a property. And there's all sorts of different aspects of that. And the beauty of it is saying, this is worth something. Belizean stories are worth something. And the people that are involved with it are worth something. And so when an international distributor like Netflix comes to the table, they are going to look at what they call chain of title, right. The value of everything. So like on all the shows that I've worked on, we are given standards and practices where you think, okay, and I worked for MTV years ago, and I thought, they don't have, they clearly have words that are flagged that you cannot say. They cannot be on the network. And you think about as a company that might produce advertisement, commercials, brands that are looking to say, who are your people? Who are your audience? What are your values as a company? And that translates into what things you want to say and not say. And then also tying into like when you're looking at creativity and you bring in someone who might have a jingle or a musician or an actor or a producer, all these different people, it's like a house with property rights, water rights, mineral rights. And then is it something where you keep on drawing water out of that well? It's $50 for 10 years? That's not right.
Right.
Yeah.
Sorry, but just to go off of what Chris is saying, what I find myself as a musician, if I take off my niche hat and I represent myself as an artist, understanding our value is something that we're still working on, because we are artists. We've put in years. I've been in the music industry. I don't want to give away my age, maybe like 10, 15 years. William knows, right? And even though I've been in the music industry, and my colleagues, all of us, Tanya, Ernestine, Super G, a lot of us fail to realize that if we do not copyright what we are creating now, we are not necessarily going to have anything to live from 20, 30 years from now. And it's the same across the board. However, when it comes to value, if we don't value ourselves, then who will value us? We go to a lot of production houses sometimes, and we're explaining, okay then, well, we can come on your show, and yes, we can perform for, for free. However, that performance goes on YouTube, it goes on Facebook, that's our song playing out there. And I think the only person in Belize that has a system where if their music is played in public space, they collect for it currently is Kendall Simpson. But he has included that in his work. If I use his beat and it's played on Facebook, but I sang the song on Channel 5, he will collect a couple cents for that because it's being used in a public space. And I think those are some of the conversations we need to have tomorrow. What is considered public space? If Channel 5 does an interview with me on Albert Street and Kendall's song is playing in Downtown Plaza, and then that streams on YouTube, he collects for that because it's being used in a public space. But what exactly is public space? How do I protect myself as a singer or a musician in a public space? How do I get the network or media houses to respect the quality of work that I offer and to respect the value of my work?
Let me just ask, based on what you said just now, how do you envision letting Belizeans understand that it's a global marketplace that you're in, basically? Because I think that's the challenge sometimes. You go, the market dictates what you can earn, so to speak.
Right.
But very often in Belize, if the two of us are vying for something and Kevin says, well, I'll do it for 50, and I say I'll do it for free,
Right.
So how do you get that aspect of it?
I will, let me answer first and then allow them to answer. There has to be, and I will talk personally, standards. I tell folks all the time that, when a production comes in, as a group of artists, you have to say, okay, the bottom that we would do it for, it's no longer free, it's $50, and I'm just using a figure. That sets a value that no one should go under. And that also sets a value to producers coming in, that this is what the standards are. And we have to kind of stick to that as a group. Now, if they want you, yes, you can get more because maybe your talent is better than this gentleman here, and
it is.
You can you can negotiate that. But there has to be a minimum. There has to be a baseline that we can't go under, because if we do that, and again, I understand, economics, that I'm trying to survive. You're actually cheapening the game in the long run. And we're trying to do something that will sustain long after you or I are a part of this industry.
And before we talk down the road, we're seeing because Belizeans, we see things right in front of us. The long game sometimes avoids us. And we're seeing with our cable bills, we're seeing where we're having an increase. But I know that maybe soon next year, we're going to have to have subscriptions to HBO and Cinemax and these things. And I also know that will force us to create something called local content.
Yes.
And so this copyright workshop that you're having is important because this is on us now.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can you talk to us about the opportunities for local content and how this industry will, because there's certain words that Belizeans hear, jobs, money to me,
Yeah.
and fame. how do we prepare people to the know of why this workshop on managing copyright in audiovisual production is important for
No. Before, I think Chris can answer that in regards to the content that we could use. What I would like to just tie in to your question is that it's really in partnership with trade. Belize has made some trade agreements, and some of those trade agreements are being called into question because we are not meeting our copyright compliance. It's one of the reasons why there are certain things like Spotify and Apple Music and some of those things are not working in Belize. So some of our trade agreements that we've had with the US are now being questioned. And the Directorate General of Foreign Trade is looking at addressing copyright now because it's starting to affect other areas of our bilateral agreements, such as our trade with the US. There are conversations happening now where networks are coming to Belize and saying, hey, so I know you're using
HBO.
Yes, so you're gonna have to pay for that. However, the conversation is ongoing, and like I said, it's a conversation because of our population is small. Our population is really small, and what they want to charge us to pay for the network, we may not necessarily be able to afford. However, the opportunity there, as you have mentioned, is that there will now be a chance for us to have more local content on our TV stations. Now, what does that? Yes. Well, it's a silver lining, and in other Caribbean countries, it's been happening. So what government has done is created opportunities to fund local productions because they know that it's imminent, it's coming. Like you said, it's now, and some ways that we can look at it from an opportunity point of view is, there are funding opportunities that can be offered so that these productions and these stories can be told.
Yeah.
The thing is, and this is the last thing, we want to make good quality content that just happens to be local. That's the way you look at it.
I love that.
All right, because what we make here, mark my words, it will be seen to a global market. Those things are already being put in place, already started. So our challenge is to get the level of local content to that level. And we're not far off. It's just being tweaked here or there because the uniqueness about Belizeans, and even though this is a small country, we have an excellent talent pool that just needs direction across the board, man.
Chris?
And I think that's where, when you think about what stories can be told, you also have to think about, like you're saying, it's also tied to the money. Because everything shouldn't be done for free. And you think, oh, well, who are the people that might fund it? It could be government, it could be grants or awards. But also you look at advertising and brands. One of the things that's really driving content internationally is also some brands actually have larger audiences than some networks. So you can think, okay, there's brands that are in Belize that are global brands, and there's brands in Belize that are also becoming global brands. So there's opportunities for them to tell stories as well. But when you look at a story being told from the nuts and bolts of production, if content that's being used, everything from a sound effect to a song to an actor or ... if it's not compliant internationally, I can tell you undoubtedly it will not be bought. They would say if we want to buy it, then you need to get the releases in place, i.e. the contracts in place, so then it could be, that's the whole chain of title conversation. I have colleagues in Hollywood, all they do is clear films and television shows for festivals and for distribution, so it can go on TV, it can be seen in other markets around the world. Because you might have a contract, but it's only limited to the Belizean market. But if it's something that contractually, it's in all markets globally, you understand the value of what it, so if that song plays, an artist is going to get paid. It's like, are you performing for 10,000 people or 10 million people or 100 million people? and you don't want to be greedy. Greed can drive things, and you have to be very careful. But it also can open up the stakeholders and companies to exposure if their paperwork is not in order. Because there's people in Hollywood and on shows, and even some of the things that they're sharing, that they will literally go through rights and clearances of every show, and they'll say, is every location released? Is every person on camera released? Is every sound, graphic, image, do we have the rights to everything? Because be assured, there are people who will say, wow, this show was successful, or you made a lot of money for your product. I'm owed something. And if the contract isn't there, then it opens your company up to exposure. And people could pursue legal recourse for that. Not to put the fear of God into you, but that's the reality. The beauty is that if you can do this in advance, and working with the Film Commission, with Bavia and some of the producing organizations and creative organizations, you can help set some standards for contracts and say, we are global players. We have stories to be told.
I just want to say, and this is one of the reasons tomorrow our workshop is geared towards anyone who's doing a production. Whether you're big, small, whether you're a big media house, whether you're a small person.
A big dreamer, right?
A dreamer, whether you want to think about doing something. Even if you're a talent, even if you're someone who does voiceovers for commercials on TV, singer, musicians, but especially corporate houses as well who have media teams, or marketing teams, whoever is in the business of creating content and use talent, and it's put on TV, YouTube, Instagram, wherever. We're asking you to please come and have this conversation.
What are the details?
The details are, well, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, I think 5 presenters.
What time?
And it starts at 8 a.m. It's not going to be it's going to be next to the Belize Biltmore Plaza at the Caribbean Motors conference room, which we're going to be using tomorrow. There's a small fee that covers all the documents that you're going to be getting, contracts, copies of releases, things like that. So it's an entire package. We have James, who's going to be speaking on music. We have Biscap. We also have Marissa Longsworth, who has worked both locally and internationally, and she understands the entertainment industry and how copyright is affected by that, and she's going to be talking about that. A very important thing that I want to mention, we didn't get a chance to mention, is social responsibility and gender stereotypes. There was an issue with a Belize commercial that was flagged on Facebook, because the commercial mentioned something like, oh, only women cook behind stove or something like that. And it was highlighted, and people are starting to realize these things. The whole Me Too movement is also catching on in Belize. So we want to look at social responsibility with what you put on TV. And then, of course, Chris is going to talk about and being an expert in that field, and Ola from Belipo. So we have all the players at the table. We're asking everyone to call us, 227-2110, if you are interested in taking the workshop.
Or just show up tomorrow, right?
Or just show up and register and be prepared to pay your fee.
Well, we want to thank you guys for joining us this morning. Very important conversation. And I think it's now. It should have been happening quite some time ago, but definitely better late than never. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Our pleasure.
Thank you for the
Thank you
time.
for having us.
Thank you.
We're going to go to break, and when we come back, it'll be to talk about brain tumor awareness. Don't go anywhere. Open Your Eyes continues after these messages.